Budweiser's good for me.
Budweiser?
Yeah, it's good.
No, we'll go and import it here.
Yeah, please.
You know, you can afford it.
I can afford it, Lou. Hey, Budweiser.
Okay.
Well, at least have a Bud Ice or a Bud Dry or something.
Lou, it is just a bud.
It seems that Hollywood is indeed becoming rapidly another advertising medium.
Is there a Dunkin' Donuts in this town?
Advertising is a form of propaganda. We must never forget this. And propaganda makes one point repeatedly.
Grab a red stripe out of the fridge.
Repeatedly.
Could I have 2 extra strength Tylenol and a glass of water, please?
Repeatedly.
Is it true that you lost your Pepsi endorsement?
When you look at the way movies are made today, you almost should be in the aisles of a supermarket. They're so closely connected to selling products.
See that Coke can on top of the alien craft?
When advertising and marketing are the defining logic of an age, it affects everything, including the movies.
There's never been a moment when Hollywood was not tied up with commerce. From the very moment that Thomas Edison invented the technology, the movies have always been organized as a profit-making venture, so we shouldn't be idealizing any sort of golden age when film was some pure, untainted art form. But having said that, nonetheless, in the last 30 years, there's really been an institutional shift that's integrated movie making into the much broader industries of marketing, advertising, and selling products. I call this shift hyper-commercialism. And what I mean by that is simply that the whole process of selling and promoting, commercializing, has permeated every nanosecond, every pore of our culture.
So advertisers are looking for any place that is not already cluttered with other people's messages, and the movies are perfect for that.
You know, there's a fairly long history of these kinds of placements. Back in the 1950s, for example, the De Beers Company used to bribe scriptwriters to prominently place discussions of diamonds as engagement rings into the dialogue of Hollywood films.
Here's your engagement present, darling.
Oh, Jeffrey, it's beautiful.
Early placements were mostly informal arrangements, and they really weren't that frequent. What's changed now is that far from being any sort of exception, they've gone to almost being the rule in Hollywood. In fact, today there's a whole new industry with its own trade association whose primary role is to broker deals between the advertisers on one hand and the movie producers on the other hand. These companies boast, in fact, that they've got a finger on every active script in Hollywood.
An early revelatory moment here in how effective movies could be as a sales vehicle was, interestingly, the movie Dirty Harry.
But Ian, this is a 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off.
Now, this was a gun that was not selling particularly well, but after Dirty Harry came out, the sales of the 44 Magnum went through the roof. And this, I think, caused light bulbs to go off in producers' heads when they realized that a movie could actually be an incredibly effective vehicle for selling a product. When you have Reese's Pieces being the thing that lures E.T. along, well, the sales of Reese's Pieces went through the roof. I mean, how cool did Tom Cruise look in those Ray-Bans in Risky Business? And after that, everybody wanted Ray-Bans.
Why has this happened? Well, primarily because advertisers are always looking for some way to get a controlled environment where audiences can't escape the ads by zapping them or ignoring them. And film producers like it because they can get money to make their films. But if you're a fan of movies, the question we have to ask is, what does this do to the process of movie making?
Placement is just one example, and a really flagrant example of a kind of overpowering commercialism that has come to distort the whole filmmaking process.
Again, BMW gave us a lot of money if we put their car in the movie, so we did.
We use a Tag Heuer big clock, and I put that little Tag logo there, and it saved me $75,000.
You know, movie producers used to look to investors when they were trying to get a movie off the ground, but now they look to advertisers too. Pampers paid $50,000 to appear in 3 Men and a Baby, Huggies $100,000 for Baby Boom, Cuervo Gold, $150,000 for Tequila Sunrise, Exxon, $300,000 for Days of Thunder, and Lark Cigarettes, $350,000 for License to Kill. You know, this can get very competitive. Forbes and Fortune were duking it out with each other over which of the magazines was going to appear in Wall Street.
Well, it's in the Bible. Since it is now so expensive to promote a movie, tremendously costly, the producers are often looking for ways to get some money back and some promotions as well. This can be a matter of putting a product in the background of a scene. It can be a matter of actually writing dialogue into a script.
What is it with single men and V8 juice?
You do not realize that Taco Bell was the only restaurant to survive the franchise wars.
All I want is a Pepsi.
Or it can involve what I like to call the plug deluxe, which is a shot of the star actually using and enjoying the product, which is, I suppose, worth its weight in gold to the advertiser. Product placement, to put it very simply, is a practice that turns movies into outright commercials.
It's Miller time!
There's the moment in Good Will Hunting where we see Matt Damon and Ben Affleck carrying their Dunkin' Donuts tumblers to the car, which is fine. Dunkin' Donuts is a Boston institution, but the fact that they hold the tumblers so that those logos are faced directly into the camera, that makes it a plug and therefore not realistic. You've got a very good thriller called Internal Affairs. But all of a sudden, there are these logos staring at me like a couple of big eyes. And at that point, the movie just kind of stops for a second. Same thing happens in Summer of Sam. You've got all these guys sitting around in a diner drinking their Pepsis, and Spike Lee, the director of many a TV commercial, has the logos facing the camera. And there again, suddenly, that's what we see, that's what we notice. It upstages everybody. There's a particularly rich example of concentrated placement from the mid-'80s when Columbia Pictures was purchased by Coca-Cola. And they started writing whole scenes into movies that were about Coke. For example, there's the John Candy comedy, Who's Harry Crumb?
Sherry? No proof, thank you.
Really pointless, but striking as an example of utterly gratuitous product placement.
Coke? No, thank you. Mix them together, you get a cherry Coke.
We see the Cola Wars coming to the movies in a film called Missing, which is produced by Columbia, which was owned by Coca-Cola. Missing was a film about an American student who was murdered, and in the film, we see repeatedly images of Pepsi and the Pepsi logo associated with the Pinochet regime and the soldiers and the bad guys, and Coca-Cola associated with the Americans, the good guys.
A la vida.
Olive.
To life.
We all know through the strategic placement of products that advertisers colonize space, all kinds of space. But we don't necessarily think about the way in which advertisers colonize time. And by time, I mean history, our notions of the past, our notions of the future, so that we see a product in a film that's allegedly about the 1950s, and it gives that product an inevitability, as if it was always there.
I guess I'll have a salad and an Evian water.
Or we see the same product in the future, in a futuristic movie, as if it's always going to be there.
There is a kind of tradition of mocking product placement.
Contractor, no. I will not bow to any sponsor.
Interestingly enough, none of the advertisers are taking offense. Nobody's really hurt by this satire. It's toothless satire.
You know, even in a film like The Truman Show, which has various spoof placements put throughout the film.
Why don't you let me fix you some of this new Mococo drink? All natural cocoa beans from the upper slopes of Mountain Nicaragua, no artificial sweeteners.
What the hell are you talking about?
They kind of serve as a smokescreen because there actually is a paid placement in the film for a Ford Taurus. And so these spoof placements kind of take away from people's awareness that there are real placements in the film.
The defenders of the practice say over and over and over again that it's more realistic to have products placed in the frame than not. There's a very big difference between a world of products that looks like the world we live in and the world of products that's based on placement. Placement is very, very unrealistic because it is a way for the products to look as glamorous, as heavenly as they do in a TV commercial. And that's not the way life is. A movie like Armageddon, for example, has a love scene between Liv Tyler and Ben Affleck in which the setting sun sort of shares the frame with this lustrous new BMW. And we also see him cutely walking animal crackers over her luscious body. Well, that's something you see in advertising all the time, is the sexual allure gets kind of deflected onto this thing you eat or drink. That's a pure advertising moment because it's so reductive.
What advertising suggests is that products, commodities, are the agents of love, happiness, success.
Big or small, you give your all. Moms like you choose Jim.
Now, when the movies start taking over this function, advertising and products move to center stage in these very powerful narratives. An early example of this is Mac and Me, in which the space aliens are revived by Coke. A more recent example is Bowfinger, that ends with FedEx delivering the contract of a lifetime to Steve Martin's character. And it's not just scenes. Products now actually provide the emotional core of films. In At First Sight, for example, about the life of a blind man, the first thing he sees is a can of Coke.
It's a can.
This kind of corporate investment is illustrated really well in a film like Happy Gilmore, in which Subway actually becomes the agent, the protector, the provider who helps the Adam Sandler character save his grandmother's house.
Talk about a hole-in-one.
Subway sandwiches will drive away your hunger.
That commercial put us up to $275,000. Let's go get your house back.
You can see how this is changing the way movies are conceived by looking at films from different time periods.
You've Got Mail is at the end of a long tradition of really great movies from Hollywood. A lot of the Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn comedies, movies like The Awful Truth, His Girl Friday, they're genuinely witty and they're about something. You know, they're about a kind of romantic tug of war. You've Got Mail is a different thing. It takes that general situation, it feeds it into this advertising mill. All that You've Got Mail is really about is AOL.com and Starbucks.
The whole purpose of places like Starbucks is for people with no decision-making ability whatsoever to make 6 decisions just to buy 1 cup of coffee. Short, tall, light, dark, calf, decaf, low-fat, non-fat.
The movie, in other words, is not really about this love affair. It's about this cool service and its leading corporate provider. Imagine now, think ahead and try to picture yourself, say, 40 years from now, when maybe there is no more Starbucks and AOL has been long since replaced by some other service. Imagine what you'd make of a movie like this. It'll be like some artifact from a distant era. I mean, who cares, you know? If the drama, if the dialogue, if the pacing, if these things aren't enough, then there's nothing there.
Spaceballs the t-shirt. Spaceballs the coloring book. Spaceballs the lunchbox. Spaceballs the breakfast cereal. Spaceballs the flamethrower.
You know, sometimes you'll hear people say, hey, what's the big deal about all this product placement? I mean, we have had movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's 40 years ago that had a brand name right in the title. But there's a huge difference, and the difference is simply this. We live in a commercial society. If you're going to do fiction, do films on the society, you're going to have commercial names in it. But back then, it was just went with the flow. You had to have a store. Tiffany's didn't make any money off it. Today, it's a whole industry where firms are making a pile of money. And this is where it's really crucial. It's become almost impossible to think of making a big Hollywood movie divorced from the broader strategies of marketing consumer goods.
Movies are generally integrated into marketing through three basic approaches: cross-promotions, merchandising, and tie-ins, and often these three overlap. Cross-promotion is a deal in which a product is placed in a particular movie, and in the advertising for the product, the movie is mentioned.
Why did you stop?
I was just admiring your hiney.
You've got a film like, for example, The Faculty, which had its trailer directed by Tommy Hilfiger, who also designed all the clothes that the characters in the film wear. You've got the Mod Squad. You got all the characters wearing Levi's, and then you've got Levi commercials that are clips from the film that stop the action and highlight the fact that they're wearing Levi's. Another good example is Tomorrow Never Dies, which was really just all about cross-promotion.
This looks familiar.
One of the most important criteria right now, in addition to whether a film will sell tickets or be a popular film, that a studio has to consider is how much other stuff you can sell as a result of the movie. Mugs, T-shirts, other products. It's become so important, in fact, that oftentimes with big films, you make more money from the other product sales than you do from ticket sales and just interest in the movie itself.
The point of merchandising is profit, but it's profit from a very cost-efficient point of view. And that is, you can take one central product, you can invest a tremendous amount of money in it, and then you can break that product into material to feed into every other segment of the company. So a movie is no longer just a movie. It's the book, the comic book, the soundtracks, the licensing ventures, and whatever else this particular company happens to be involved in.
Characters are created because they're, in Hollywood's terms, particularly toyetic. They lend themselves to toys, to become toys. And it's not an accident. Some of those characters are actually written into scripts. They become merchandise very easily because they've been kind of created with merchandise in mind. Any kind of film that has animals that act like humans, those make nice toys. A lot of action-adventure films lend themselves nicely to action figures that can be sold as merchandise.
There's a shot in Jurassic Park, loving pan of all the goods available in the gift shop at Jurassic Park. Well, you could walk out of the movie and into the lobby of the theater where the film opened and see the same kind of display.
Commercialism is imbued directly into the creative process of making films today in a way that wasn't the case 10 or 20 years ago. The line between the creative side and the business side of making films has been eroded. It almost doesn't exist anymore.
Movie tie-ins are arrangements made with businesses, companies, brands that already exist to tie into a movie in some way.
The most important deal along these lines came in the mid to late 1990s when Disney and McDonald's signed a 10-year deal. So whenever a Disney movie came along, it would be the only thing advertised in the Happy Meal at McDonald's at all 23,000 McDonald's restaurants around the world.
Now at McDonald's, you can get cool plates from Disney's new movie, like Zeus, Phil, and Her. $1.99 more when you get a Happy Meal.
So it's an enormous boost for Disney. Every time they have a kids movie, it gets the entire McDonald's crowd knowing about it and their Happy Meals, and people think of the Disney movie and they think of McDonald's at the same time. And the trade press has even called them McDisney, and to give some sense of how closely joined at the hip they are.
Star Wars Phantom Menace represents a leap forward, perhaps, in tie-ins, in that they featured Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut, tied in very closely with the film, and we had 3, not 1, fast food restaurants, not only featuring products tying into Phantom Menace, but also providing the bulk of the advertising, at least broadcast television advertising, for the film.
In theaters across the country, you can see the most famous heroes in the galaxy.
Well, second most famous.
There's nothing that marketers and advertisers like better than to turn the whole culture into a kind of echo chamber for their latest pitch. They want to make the whole world around us resonate with nothing but the message.
The Star Wars trilogy is back on the big screen, and it's even better with a Pepsi.
Great effects, man.
And I can hardly wait because, you know, Star Wars coming out in May. Premiere Magazine has 4 collector's editions with different covers. See, there's Natalie, there's George, there's that cutie patootie Ian McGregor.
You can buy these right now. You can go to various stores, pick them right up. Star Wars Glow-in-the-Dark Puzzle. You see that right there? They got a little warning label here in the corner. By the time you complete this puzzle, George Lucas will have made another $1 billion.
If we look at the Phantom Menace carefully, it shows us really clearly the product saturation logic that's going to dominate Hollywood in the 21st century. Although the film itself was pretty expensive to produce, around $115 million, that figure is overwhelmed. It's dwarfed by the merchandising deals that had already been set up before the film even opened. Those were worth $3.5 billion. And I think that's why a lot of people were disappointed with the Phantom Menace, because it was essentially an extended ad for all this merchandise. But Hollywood's created movies as commercials before. Back in the 1990s, Time Warner made a film called Space Jam, and it was a film that linked Michael Jordan with Bugs Bunny. And it was based on the idea that had been generated in a Nike shoe commercial on television a couple of years earlier. And when they made the film, they basically said, we don't really care if this film does well at the box office, because we think we can sell $1 billion worth of merchandise with Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny on the shirts and the cups and the mugs. So anything we get from the box office, in this case, is fringe benefit. And I think here you get to see the logic of the commercial system. Warner Brothers made this film, but they could have made another film that might have been a great film in its own right, but wouldn't have sold all sorts of stuff like T-shirts, mugs, socks.
A new Warner Brothers catalog. Use it to order your Warner Brothers ball cap. And while you're at it, you can order stuff like T-shirts, posters, movie books.
If you look at the way Hollywood is structured now, it's clear that they're not interested in making the best movies, they're interested in making the best deals.
In Hollywood, you believe they're less interested in the pure art of making movies and more interested in the marketing of movies, primarily.
I think that's a fair statement.
This new structure of selling in Hollywood did not arise by accident. This is the result of new institutional structures in Hollywood, many of them made possible by these huge mega mergers.
The deal will create a company with a major television network, a movie production studio, vast holdings in cable television, the largest outdoor advertising company, and assets that will rival other media moguls like Time Warner and Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation.
And in the process, we will create an $80 billion giant.
One of the things to keep in mind when one goes to see a film at a theater, that it probably has been produced and distributed by a company that also owns television network, music companies, theme parks, lots of other kinds of media activities.
So why has this happened? What's the logic here? Well, the reason is that these companies discovered they can be much more profitable if they're conglomerates. In fact, they can't even survive unless they're conglomerates. So what we've seen in the past 2 decades is the number of media firms has shrunk from over 20 to less than 10 dominant media firms in the U.S. Take Time Warner, the largest media company in the world. You know, it's one of the top 3 or 4 film companies. It has more cable channels than anyone in the United States. It's a major book publisher. It's one of the largest music companies in the United States, the largest magazine company in the United States. And this is what's happened. The largest firms have become conglomerates.
I think the Disney company is a good example to use to understand the concept of synergy.
From magical movies to unforgettable adventures, from the thrill of the theater to the comfort of your home, you can always count on something new and exciting from Disney.
Here we have a company that begins to think about a film But at the same time, they think about the kind of merchandise that can accompany that film. They think about the kind of theme park ride that can be produced from that film. They think about how it can be promoted across all of their other media outlets.
So you've got a film like The Lion King, made by Disney in 1994. It was one of the great animated films in Hollywood history. It did something like $800 million in global box office. Now Disney, the film company, gets to keep about half that. The other half goes to the film theaters. So they have $300 or $400 million in their revenues. You know how much profit Disney made? They made over $1 billion in pure profit from The Lion King. Well, how do you get $1 billion in profit out of $300 million in revenue? That's some pretty funny math, right? Well, then you stop and you consider what Disney can do with The Lion King. It can make a TV show for its Disney Channel or for its ABC television network. It can make Lion King rides for its Disneyland and Disney World and Euro Disney amusement parks. It has created 200 Lion King products that it can sell in its 660 Disney stores. CD-ROMs, it can make spin-off comic books, soundtracks. The possibilities are endless. So what this means is very simple. This is where it's important. If you only make animated films and do nothing else, your margin for error is a lot less, your risk is much greater. I mean, you're out there on a high wire, and if your film bombs, you're dead. Disney, on the other hand, they're out there. Even if their film doesn't do well at the box office, they can make $500 million doing all that other stuff.
One example of how difficult it can be for new content providers to break in to this kind of field and succeed is DreamWorks SKG, which features 3 of the richest and possibly most creative and talented people in Hollywood, Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen. But DreamWorks SKG is not part of one of these multimedia conglomerates, so it doesn't have the structure to advertise and promote.
The best example came in the fall of 1998 when DreamWorks released its much-acclaimed film, The Prince of Egypt. But it didn't do very well at the box office. At the same time, the Rugrats movie, released by Viacom, which owns Nickelodeon and Paramount, was released. It did extremely well at the box office. And if you put the two together, The Prince of Egypt was a much more impressive film. It should have done better, you'd think, on surface. But what advantage did the Viacom film Rugrats movie have? Well, the Rugrats movie, made by Paramount, could be pumped and promoted incessantly on Nickelodeon, the TV network owned by Viacom. It could be pumped and promoted even on MTV, which is owned by Viacom. It was pumped and promoted repeatedly on Entertainment Tonight, the TV show produced by Paramount Television. In short, it had massive publicity that the Viacom corporate machine could throw into gear to pump up an audience and prepare it for this movie. And it worked, and made a fortune on this movie that didn't cost very much to produce. DreamWorks, on the other hand, if they want to compete with that movie, what do they have to do? They've got to buy ads. They've got to pay money, because they don't own TV stations. They don't own cable networks. They don't produce TV shows that are carried across the country. And they couldn't afford to do that. That would come out of their bottom line. And that it's now seen that's the primary reason that film did not become a smash hit at the box office. It didn't have that sort of promotional muscle behind it.
And as the media industries tend more and more to be owned by, the same huge few corporations, so that the news divisions, too, are part of the same system. You tend more and more to get news items, big news stories that are really nothing more than journalistic echoes of the latest hype or product from the entertainment side of the business. So you get, for example, Time magazine devoting a cover story to the phenomenon of tornadoes. And I don't think it's entirely accidental that the cover of that issue bears a striking resemblance, visually, compositionally, to the poster for the movie Twister. It came out just before that issue appeared, and which is a Warner Brothers film. See, same parent company. Time Warner owns the magazine and the movie studio, so why not? Why not use the magazine's journalistic resources to intensify, to ground the hype? The great meltdown of the media, the fact that all the culture industries are basically owned by the same huge concerns, has had disastrous effects on what used to be known as film criticism, film reviewing. Well, now, most film reviewers work for one or another of the same companies that make the movies. If you look at the blurbs, you look at the affiliations of these reviewers, and these are owned by, as often as not, the very companies that either make that movie or other movies. And even if it's not the same company, they're all engaged in the same enterprise, which is promotional. You know, you can't be a critic and a promoter at the same time. It's impossible.
Listen to what some of the principal players have to say in private. Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney, said in a memo, and I quote, "We have no obligation to make history. We have no obligation to make art. We have no obligation to make a statement. To make money is our only objective."
The greater the degree to which things are concentrated in huge multinational corporations, the more things that aren't guaranteed to produce $100 million profits will be marginalized and wiped out and ironed out and homogenized, you know, and that's the curse of living in a culture that's dominated by the marketplace.
I like my share of superficial blockbusters, too. I mean, I think I've seen Dumb and Dumber 8 times. But the question we have to ask, is that just enough for our movie culture? Is that enough for the society? If we want to get more out of entertainment than that, more out of films than that, then we've got to ask tough questions about making room for other kinds of films, other kinds of movies that aren't based on this hyper-commercial logic. Take a look at a film like The Full Monty, this offbeat British comedy that through the word of mouth in the US became a really popular film. Or something like The Blair Witch Project, which used the internet really in a clever way to get out and get publicity. What if instead of being the exceptions that proved the rule, there really was a space in Hollywood for that kind of film to be produced all the time? This country is brimming with talented people. The problem is we have a system that doesn't allow this talent to really develop and fulfill what it's capable of doing. To the extent we get great movies or original movies out of Hollywood, it's usually because some very talented and creative people have marshaled all their capital together from all their commercial successes to push something through that the studios would never do otherwise. The classic case in point recently was Warren Beatty, who after doing big hit after big hit for the studios was able to get Fox to go ahead and produce his film Bulworth, which is one of the most radical and interesting and creative movies that Hollywood made in a decade.
We can't get health insurance, fire insurance, life insurance. Why haven't you come out for Senate Bill 2720?
Well, because you haven't really contributed any money to my campaign, have you?
But Beatty, to do that, basically had to push everything I had onto the table to get it done. A lesser star wouldn't have had a prayer.
One of the wisest pieces of advice I was ever given when I went pitching, because that's one of the things that you do as a writer, you go around to studio executives and you tell them a story. Wouldn't this make a good movie? And very friendly and smart guy who was at Universal at the time, named Tom Craig, said to me, "That's a really good story, and it could be a really good movie, but we would never buy that pitch because we don't want to buy things that have to be well made in order to be successful. That story, if it's not done with the right director and the right actors, will be a big flop. But if you say Tom Hanks and a bulldog are partners in a police thing, it could be the worst movie ever made, and we won't lose a dime."
Not too long ago, just 2 or 3 years ago, Siskel and Ebert had one of their television shows where they looked back at the 1970s, which is now considered the golden age of Hollywood film. And they made a list of the 10 best movies of the 1970s. And at the end of the show, they concluded that none of those films, not any of those 10 films, could have been made in the studio system that we have today. They all would have been thrown out because they didn't have happy endings. They didn't have the sort of unambiguous good guys and bad guys that films seem to have today.
The movies have always been a place where commerce and art have mixed. But in the last few years, this balance has really shifted dramatically.
If we think of filmmaking as a narrative enterprise, if we think of the filmmaker as obliged to tell a good story, which is a pretty, traditional definition, then we have to recognize that commercialism has, in many ways, distorted the whole enterprise of making movies.
Peter Bart, the editor of Variety, the main trade publication of the film industry and formerly a studio executive, has written repeatedly how today it's virtually impossible to make great movies. Once the marketing people get done with it and the focus groups get done with it, virtually all the integrity, virtually all the creativity is stripped out of the process. We've seen this happen in television, and now we're looking at it take place in films. The question we have to ask is, are we going to allow film to be hijacked like this by advertisers and corporations into the future?